Okay, next news story, and this one, wow, I just don't know what to make of this. There was wide-scale disbelief amongst the audience on this one, but it's been revealed that 2 games as a service projects from the Sony first-party studios have been cancelled. Those games are in development at Bend Studio, and remarkably, Blue Point Games. One of them has been confirmed. Blue Point was apparently working on a live service God of War game. Let's just have a moment of hushed awe for that particular concept and the idea that Blue Point was doing that. They're not happening now. Years of work potentially wasted, similar to what happened with the Naughty Dog Factions game for The Last of Us. Oliver, I'd love your opinions on this, because this seems... Look, we don't really know what's happening here. We don't know the full story, but the concept that Blue Point was working on a live service God of War game, I find that to be... Is it mismanagement, even? It doesn't sound like a good idea, at the very least, does it?
It seems kind of malicious to put such a talented group of people who are responsible for producing some of the best remaster remake projects of all time, in my opinion, on a live service God of War game. I don't even know where to start with that, but I think it's a bit of a shame that Sony went down this path and wasted the talents of some of their biggest developers, because so far we've had Blue Point, Naughty Dog, and Bend Studio working on big games, live service games that have all been canceled in roughly the last year. And then there are a number of smaller studios as well, like Deviation Games. There was a game from London Studios. Obviously, they got shut down. There was a Twisted Metal game. There was a Destiny spin-off. There was Insomniac's Spider-Man Great Web, the Great Web game, which I don't know how
oh my goodness,
deep into production that was, but it was certainly canceled. And now, you know, you look at Sony's upcoming lineup and it's like, okay, Ghost of Yorte, Wolverine, Death Stranding 2, Intergalactic. That's not bad by any means, but it, you know, is probably thinner than it should be, considering the efforts of some of these studios. In some cases, they were working for, like, I think the God of War game was reportedly in development for 4 years. That's a crazy amount of time to be working on a game for it to be canceled, I think. Obviously, single-player games can have their ups and downs, and some of them do get canceled, but it seems like these live service titles, they take a longer amount of time to break that concept and to figure out if it works. And then if it doesn't work, you're kind of out a lot of development resources. And if it, you know, if ultimately you do make it and it does hit like Helldivers 2, that's great. But, like, you know, you have one massive hit and then like several games that are in production for several years that get canceled, and one game that got launched kind of abortively, famously, and got killed there with Concord. So yeah, I mean, on some level I understand it, and that games are taking so long to make and so many resources to make, and the conventional model of making single player games isn't working out, at least in the current margin. Now maybe you look forward a few years, maybe the incredible progress in things like large language models, maybe you can push things out a little bit faster and do things better. But yeah, I mean, for now, it just seems like kind of a bit of a dire situation, but I don't think the Sony approach was the right approach. In retrospect, I almost think the Microsoft approach was a little bit better, and I think we're seeing some of the fruits of that possibly with titles like Doom, The Dark Ages, completely eschewing multiplayer whatsoever. You know, there's no multiplayer in Doom, The Dark Ages, and titles like that are coming out. A large number of titles coming to Game Pass published by Microsoft this year that are all looking pretty nice relative to Sony's mooted lineup possibly into this year and the next.
Mm-hmm. Alex?
Wow. I would have loved to have been a fly on the wall of the meeting where they're like, you know, these guys make incredible remasters, but how about a looter God of War games as a service? Like, I really would love to know who pitched it, because it almost seems like I could not physically imagine anyone from Blue Point themselves pitching it. So it seems very strange to me. And I feel like the titles that like really are breakout successes in the games as a service genre have an entire studio culture and history and group of designers and artists who've worked in these similar fields before. And they kind of like, you know, there's a random element too. Like, I wouldn't have necessarily expected something like Helldivers 2 to do as well as it did in comparison to other games that do similar things. But lo and behold, was. So there is a random element here, but I just don't think you can just like throw this type of workload at every studio. There are people who are specialists at it. And there's that, once again, that lack of mind. Like there's only so many games as a service games that can exist. And then you read stories online about like, okay, so now this new Marvel game is like blowing up right now. What is it called?
Marvel Rivals.
Marvel Rivals, that's blowing up. But then something like Apex Legends is going down in terms of how many numbers it has. So like there's obviously a shifting core demographic that is moving over time eventually to other titles or just giving up totally. So like there's this lack, you can only fight for a certain size of the market. And I don't think throwing every single studio like Sony did at this was at all the right idea. In fact, it sounded really bad. And that was obviously not their core strength before. It was in the PS4 gen and late PS3 gen. It was 100% core gamer titles with single player narratives, right? So it feels totally like absolute wrong decision. And it makes me sad too, because we won't see anything from Blue Point or Bend presumably now for a long time.
Yeah.
Right? Like they'll just skip the generation at this point, Bend, right?
Well,
so
unless there's, like multiple teams within the developer doing different things, which is a possibility.
Maybe.
Of course.
Maybe.
Yeah, I mean, I don't really know what to make of all of this. I just think, Blue Point acquired by Sony, this was like lauded at the time. Obviously, the Demon's Souls remake was like astonishingly good stuff, but just their body of work across the years has been phenomenal. And the concept that they'd do a God of War game, I mean, I kind of thought that maybe they would develop their own IP, put their talents, their obvious talents to use in creating something new and exciting, as opposed to, an offshoot of an existing game with a concept that just sounds highly questionable from the outset. Baffling. Ben Studio, I guess we don't really know what they are up to with their particular project. But, still thinking that the idea that the Days Gone franchise was basically terminated, probably a bad idea. It sold really well on PC. I think it actually sold pretty well on PlayStation as well. There's plenty that they could have done with the new generation. You're quite right. We're actually seeing the possibility that we won't actually see any game from these developers this generation, which is quite staggering when you think about it. I don't really know what more to say about this. I'm just thinking back to Astrobot and the vibes you got off that, which was, it was a reminder of when Sony put out a diverse portfolio of games of different sizes, concept-driven, still delivering those AAA juggernauts, but, experimental, curious, exciting. And, to see, Blue Point doing a God of War live service game, rather astonishing stuff. I can't quite get my head around this, but it's not good, is it?